Let's all find a seat. There's lots of seats. There are a lot of seats all around the edges. If you'd like a seat. There's always seats in the front, you know that. That's the rule. My name is Pam Fuchs, and I am the current president of the Assembly. And I want to welcome everyone here tonight. We are so fortunate to be in a community with Laplaya Trail Association and with the Portuguese Historical Society. What a great group everybody makes when we're together. And now, if you would, in deference to Veterans Day, if you would stand and let's have a moment of silence for our veterans. Thank you all. It is my pleasure to introduce Sally Bexler, who is the Vice President and Program Chairman for the Point Loma Assembly, and she will take over the program from here.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Point Loma Assembly, Laplaya Trail, and honored guests. It's great to be out and about again, isn't it? And great to be here in the hall, filling the hall like we used to do, right? So thank you for coming out tonight, and if you want to wear a mask, obviously we have them for you at the front door, and if you don't, we just trust that you are being safe and considerate of others, and we're going to have a great program tonight. This has been a long time coming, getting the Portuguese Historical Center together here with Laplaya Trail and the Assembly. Thanks to Connie Kunzel. Connie, she might still be on the front porch checking in. Yay! And the Laplaya Trail Association has had some wonderful programs throughout this whole COVID period of time on Zoom. I think you've mastered the Zoom process. I think I saw quite a few of them. They were very entertaining and very historical, so I'm sure this will be exactly the same. Very interesting and historical. And it's wonderful to have real Portuguese food here. We know growing up here in Point Loma, a lot of us did grow up here in Point Loma, that the Portuguese people are such a big part of Point Loma, and we love having you here, and we're going to learn so much more. Yes, give them a hand. Give them a round of applause. We went to grade school with you, we went to middle school or high school with you, Point Loma High School with you, and church with you. A lot of you go to St. Agnes, as do we. So we learned so much from you, and I think our community is a better place because of you. That we're so happy that you can share your knowledge, the information about your culture, how you came here to San Diego and settled in Point Loma, how you developed this community, and how you shared your wonderful food and culture with us. So to tell the story, I think you know her, she's renowned to tell the story of the Portuguese here in San Diego is Zeca Rodrigues. And to introduce Zeca, we have Kitty Daniel, and you all know Kitty, and she's going to give us a little background about Zeca and the program. Reminded me, you see right here. We do have a presentation to make to Zeca and her Portuguese officers and the people here from the Portuguese Historical Center. We have a check for $250 to you. So the real check is in the mail. We know what that means. But we wanted you to know that we totally support your effort doing this tonight. And Zeca made, you know how she is, she made a lot of the food herself. And her friends.
My sister did.
Oh, her sister. That's family for you, right? Her sister made a lot of the food, and a lot of it, of course, came from the Portuguese market, which is down by the hall. And could we just have the board or members of the Portuguese Historical Center stand up and be seen? Thank you for being here. This has been a great turnout, and it'll be a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
We're going to have a picture, I think. Linda? All right, so now without further ado, Kitty Daniel will introduce Zeca. Kitty McDaniel will introduce Zeca Rodrigues and the program for tonight.
Hi everybody, it's good to see you. I am the president of Laplaya Trail Association, and really quickly before I introduce our guest, I just wanted to let everybody know that Laplaya Trail Association is going to start a Laplaya Trail Association Point Loma History Room in the top floor of the Jennings House restaurant. Yay! And we're really excited. Of course, it's free to the public, and I'm putting it out there. If anybody has anything they think would be a good display, if you have pictures, we can scan them and return them to you. But it's a safe place for your items to be, and we hope to see you there. We're going to open soon. So, without further ado, although Zeca Rodrigues has lived in San Diego for 45 years, she didn't start out here. She was born in Val de Mar, Madeira Island, Portugal. She arrived in Point Loma when she was 15 years old. She didn't speak a word of English, but somehow she managed to graduate from Point Loma High School within just 3 years, and then went on to attend college at the University of California at Berkeley. Now, during her time at Berkeley, she lived abroad in Paris under a UC Berkeley program, and since then she has traveled the world extensively. She has worked as a paralegal for a maritime law firm, helping fishermen all over the world. Zeca is past president of the Portuguese Historical Center and the Festa de Santo Amaro organization. I always wanted to be Portuguese, but I'm not. Some of you may have heard her speak about the Portuguese in San Diego at the Congress of History, or maybe you've been lucky enough to meet her at one of the community walking tours sponsored by the Portuguese Historical Center. Zeca has done several presentations on the tuna fishing in San Diego from a Portuguese perspective. She is currently working with the New Americas Museum to preserve the oral histories of the Portuguese in San Diego. She's also working through the Portuguese Historical Center to establish a fishing museum using an old purse seiner boat at the Embarcadero. Zeca is not only ambitious and passionate about Portuguese history, but if you've met her, you know that she's really, really nice too. Tonight, Zeca will try to present 140 years of the history of the Portuguese in San Diego in less than 40 minutes.
Thank you. And for those of you who have been to some of my presentations know that I do have the gift of gab. So I will try to make this as short as possible, and we should get started. Before I do want to thank Laplaya Trails Association, and I bless you, and thank the Point Loma Assembly. I'm sorry, I just got distracted there. Thank you so much for allowing us to show you a little bit of our history here in San Diego. So without further ado, let's get it started. If you could get the lights off, please. So I thought it would be nice to let you know who we are and where we come from, and so we give you a little bit of a geography test here. So you can see Portugal right here. It's a very small country right next to Spain. We are not Spain. We are Portuguese. Now, if you were to go 1,000 miles off to the west from Lisbon, That would be the islands of the Azores. And then 600 miles south of Lisbon would be the Madeira Islands, where I'm from. And then I have another circle down here, that's the Cape Verde Islands. We do have some Portuguese that came here from the Cape Verde. And down here, almost to the tip of Africa, you have Angola and Mozambique, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later. So this is the Azores Islands. There are 9 islands that make up the Azores. The majority of the Portuguese in San Diego are from the Azores, and most of them are from this island of Pico, Faial, São Jorge, São Miguel, and there's some from people from Terceira and a few from the other islands, but the majority is Pico. So this is a picture of the island of Faial on the foreground. So this is Faial, and this is the island of Pico. And it's about a 30-minute boat ride, but you can see it's beautiful, beautiful places. And I want you to remember the proximity of these 2 islands, as I'll be talking a little bit about it later. Now this is the island of Madeira. This is where I was born, where I come from. And the interesting thing is there are 4 islands that make up Madeira, but most of the people in San Diego are from one little village called Paul do Mar. And so this is Paul do Mar. I was born right here in this very first house. And the picture on the left is actually what it looked like in about 1940. So you can see quite a difference. Now, there are Portuguese here in San Diego from Portugal. We call it the mainland. And most of the people here are from Viana do Castelo, which is way up north. We have some people from around the Lisbon area. We have in Setúbal, and also in the very end where the Algarve is, which most people know where that is. But there's a small village called Zeca, and that's where most of the Portuguese from the continent are from. So, now that I gave you a geography lesson, when did we come here and how did we get here? So, I created this little, it's called the Routes of the Portuguese Immigrants to San Diego. And you probably can't see it very well, but in the 1500s, Portugal discovered Brazil, and Portugal as a country encouraged immigration, mostly to populate those new discoveries. And so people were given land, and families were able to leave, and so they would go and go to Brazil. About the 1800s, the whaling industry is a big industry back east, and so the whalers fished all of the Atlantic Ocean. What would happen is that soon enough they would bump into the Azores Islands. They would need provisions, and most often would need men. So men started fishing or working on those whaling boats, started going to back east, and lo and behold, started to say, it's a great place to live, we can work. And then something interesting happened with the development of the whaling. Whaling became very popular in the island of Hawaii. So in the 1800s, Hawaii was actually losing people, and a Portuguese whaler in Hawaii, Hawaii needed workers for their cane sugars. So a Portuguese worker said, you want workers for the cane sugars, go for the cane fields, go to Madeira. So there was a big exodus of people from Madeira into Hawaii. When Hawaii became a state, they were able to come here. Also in the 1800s, you all know about the gold rush. So people were moving from back east onto California. And I'll talk a little bit later. There's a lady called Mrs. Noon. She passed away last year. She was a month shy of her 100th birthday, and I used to love to sit with her, and she said, you know, she moved to America in the 1930s, and she said, you know, our gold was the weather. When people went to California and it said, the weather is just like the islands, that's it made it. That's all it took. So anyway, there's other routes, and I'll give you a little bit. Of course, there's João Rodrigues Cabreiro, and there's a dispute right now. I won't go about it, but with this, I'd simply say that San Diego was made to be Portuguese. So here we have the Hawaiian connection that I was talking about, and actually we have Nalani on the right, and she's present here with us today. And Nalani came to find out that her grandfather was actually born in Paul do Mar, Madeira Island, the same place I was born. And we made a connection that she's my cousin, lives here in San Diego. Her name is Doreen Falante Correa. And her grandmother is actually family to Nalani's grandfather. So we have that Hawaiian connection. Now, in trying to think about the Portuguese in San Diego, I have here what's called an emergency passport application. And this is for José Machado Medina, and he basically says, I solemnly swear that I was born in Pico Azores, that my father resided 13 years uninterruptedly in the United States from 1877 to 1900 at San Diego, California. This family here, this is the first Portuguese family in San Diego. We believe around 1885, and Manuel and Rosalina Madruga, their descendants are still living in San Diego. They came from Pico, Azores, and they settled in Laplaya. Their oldest son actually became one of the boat builders for the bait boats. This is my aunt. Her name is Veronica Rodrigues Falante. She's actually Doreen's grandmother. And she came to Providence, Rhode Island in 1927 and into San Diego in 1930. And she actually brought a lot of the Port Madeira traditions, some that we still celebrate today. This was her daughter, Belmita Rodrigues. And Belmita was 14 years old when she traveled by herself. Her mother was already here. And here we have Mrs. Mary Freitas, Maria Tomé. There's Freitas, some of you may know her. She actually traveled by herself when she was 10 years old. So imagine coming in one of those huge boats into Massachusetts and then put on a train and coming cross country. The interesting story about Mary, why she came when she was 10 years old by herself, is because she was supposed to come with her mother, who came a year before. But when she got to, when she was boarding the boat, she had skin tags on her face. And so they wouldn't allow her to board the boat, and she had to stay behind. So I told her, 10 years old, weren't you scared to come by herself? She said, just the excitement of seeing my mother again and meeting all my family, there was no room for fear. So now we have the other immigration path. So between 1920s and 1940s, fishing was very good in San Diego. And the problem, and so workers were needed. The problem was that Portugal, too many people were leaving, and so they were kind of put to say, no, we can't have it. Also because we had what's called the colonial wars, people fighting in Angola, Mozambique. So the government wanted, especially the boys, to stay, and some confiscated passports and whatnot. So at about that same time, the United States was saying, to people coming into America, so they decided to institute what's called quotas. And quotas were assigned to countries, and only a certain number of people would be able to come to into the country. And through that program, they had what's called the family reunification, which is meaning that if you had family, you could call for them to come, but it's still, again, very limited. So in 1957, there was a huge volcanic eruption in the island of Fayal, and I showed you how proximate that was to the island of Pico. And so I'm very proud to say that because of this, there was a gentleman living in Massachusetts at the time by the name of Firmo Correa, who's also from my village, from the island of Madeira. And he wrote a letter to then Senator John F. Kennedy, and this is Kennedy's response. And this is basically saying, you know of this volcanic eruption, it's horrible, these people need help, we need to help them, bring them here. And surely enough, Kennedy responded and said, absolutely. And he and Jean Pasteur of Rhode Island worked very hard to have this called the Azorean Refugee Act of 1958. And so here we have Stella Ferreira, who I believe is here, and good friend, and her family. This is her when she was very young. Her family was the first Sinistrado family to be able to come into San Diego as a result of the volcanic eruption. So they arrived here June 3rd, 1959, and the next thing that happened with immigration is the thing that's called direct petitions. And direct petitions is like if you have a family member here and it was brother to brother or father to wife, then you were able to call for them or petition for them. And this letter here is a letter from the United States Embassy in Lisbon to Maria Neves Rodrigues and Ifilas, and her daughters are here today. And basically saying your petition has been approved, you have to present for a medical examination, and then you also have to go to and get judicial clearance, make sure you're okay. The next part that happened for the Portuguese immigrants coming to San Diego was with the development of the purseaners, the larger tuna vessels like this. What was happening was, because of the restrictions coming to America, people from Portugal could go into Panama very easily. They would just travel there, be given a permit, and they could stay. So what would happen is the tuna vessels were going to Panama and crossing the canal to then go offload their fish in the canneries in Puerto Rico. Thank you, Joe. And so what would happen is kids at 14, 15, 16 would travel by themselves to join a cousin, an uncle or a friend, and then be hired on these tuna boats. And then some of them, as we know, when the vessels would come into San Diego, fell in love, married here, and stayed here. So those are kind of, this is my sister, and her husband immigrated when he was just 18 years old from Madeira, and he went through El Salvador and then Venezuela and moved on to Panama. After they got married, they moved to Panama, and then because my father then became a U.S. citizen when we came here, he was able to call for her and her family, and then they came here at that time. Oops. So now, where did we settle when we got here? Many of you know Laplaya. Most of the Portuguese, especially early Portuguese, settled in Laplaya. This is Manuel Rosa's house, still standing, and it's now a historical site, built in 1928. This is Lawrence Oliver's home. It was built in 1936, 815 Armada Terrace, and that's, the house there. And this is what the house looks like today. This is a typical Point Loma house in the early 40s. This is Victor Rosa's house. And then I have a picture of Byron Street, and these houses here are all owned by Portuguese, and they're very typical Portuguese homes. Now, what have we done since we got here? And you all know about the tuna industry. We helped create the U.S. tuna fishing industry into a global industry. And you can see, here I have these little charts just to give you an idea of the influence of the Portuguese in the tuna industry. We have this chart from Campbell Industry, vessels entry the San Diego tuna bait fleet from 1924 to 1927. And we have 18 vessels listed, 12 of them Portuguese, 3 Italian, 2 unknown, and 1 Japanese. So, continue on. So here we have a Campbell, again, a Campbell shipyard, and this was for vessels coming in from 1927 to 1941. 29 vessels listed, 13 vessels were Portuguese owners, 4 Italian, 3 Van Camps, 3 Campbells. And the thing with this, it could actually be Portuguese or Italian because with the success of the tuna industry, the shipbuilders were actually partnering with the Portuguese and the Italian owners to, they would run the boats and the canneries and shipbuilder would put up the capital. Same thing here, 1970 through 1976. In 6 years, there were 28 vessels listed or built. 25 were Portuguese owned. And, this is just for Campbell's. There are other shipbuilders like J.M. Martinek out of Tacoma, Washington, and it's similar statistics. The tuna fishing was the 3rd largest industry in San Diego, preceded only by the Navy and aerospace. In the 1970s, San Diego was known as the tuna capital of the world, and some of you still might remember all the boats lined up in the Embarcadero. Catching, canning, and marketing tuna employed over 40,000 San Diegans. Now, to catch tuna, this is in the early days, early 1900s, typical Portuguese home right next to the water, boats right next to them. They were very small boats, similar to what they had in Portugal. Rowing boats, it worked into larger, small engine boats. They were mainly what's called hook and line. So you have a hook and a line and you fish. They were day trips and close to shore and very, very limited catch. And so you just went out and you came in and you basically caught fish for the day. Then in the 1920s, there's a gentleman by the name of Emo Medina. And we'll talk a little bit more about him a little bit later. But so he introduced the this kind of a boat. It was a diesel vessel, and it relied on the stars, on blocks of ice, on crushed fish for bait, and then the capacity is at most about 30 tons. Then we moved on to tuna clippers between 1930 and 1940. And those were a little bit bigger. They went from over 100 feet long to almost 200 feet long. It relied on the sextant and then into radar, sonar, and refrigeration. And you will notice this little canopy in the back. That's because they moved from crushing fish to actually taking live bait. So it was a long process. They would first go catch the bait, put it in these tanks, and then they would go catch the tuna. Because of these tuna clippers, it just meant there was a bigger boat, faster, bigger, and they could go farther. And so they could go from San Diego all the way down to Galapagos Islands off of Ecuador. So, and basically this is pole fishing, or fishing from the rack, which was used in the bait fishing. And it's fishing from the rack because literally they would stand on a rack. And this guy's the chummer. He would throw in the live bait into the water. The tuna would go in a frenzy. And they would use these hooks. It's a barbless hook. And they would just toss the fish right over their heads. And here I have 1 pole, 2 pole, 3 pole. And the reason for that is because depending on the size of the fish, of the tuna that they were catching, either if they were small enough, one guy could do it. If it was big enough, then they would have to attach their lines and to one hook and then be able to pull that over. The pole was a Japanese innovation, and it truly revolutionized the industry because they used bamboo poles, and it was very flexible and very strong. So this is a live picture of what pole fishing was like. and that fish just comes right over their heads or thereabouts. So now, with the bait boats, in the 1940s, of course, we have World War II, and I know some of you here had families who were part of the YPs. The YPs were called yard patrol boats. Basically, this is a tuna boat, right? They painted it gray, they gave it a number, put it in artillery, and it became a YP. And most of the vessels that were used as a YPs were Portuguese owned. So here we have, the government basically asked the tuna fishing community for volunteers. Everyone volunteered. None had military training, but all were exceptional navigators. There's a cute story. I know that some of you know who Dr. Charlotte Baker is. But it said that the government basically told the captains and officers on the tuna boats that they could continue to be officers, but they needed to prove their citizenship. So there had been a fire, and they couldn't get their birth certificates. So they went to Dr. Charlotte Baker, who delivered most of the Point Loma boys, and she kept copious notes on all of those boys, and the government accepted that as proof of their citizenship. So here we have the tuna skippers and the list of some of the Portuguese officers and that served. So 52 of these tuna vessels were commissioned, 21 vessels were lost, and dozens of life were lost as a result. So here we have YP 291, it was bait boat Normandy. The Normandy was owned by Emma Medina as well. So these YPs were often referred to as errand boys of the Pacific because they would go wherever they were told to go. And basically, one of the main functions was to patrol the coast of the United States. And they were great because they could go into shallow waters. So they also were used to deliver food and ammunition to all of the other ships. And then in Hawaii, they were asked to maneuver, in the Pacific, they were asked to maneuver through the minefields. They were often called upon to pick up fallen soldiers when they fell into the water. We're very proud that the Portuguese had quite a bit this involvement in World War II. So from tuna clippers to purse seiners. So after the war, the owners were able to buy their boats back. The problem was there's a lot of competition. The industry itself was going through some troubled times. So in 1957, there were two major innovations. One, it's called the power block, which is this little instrument here, and that allows them to haul in the net, so they don't have. The other thing is the nylon net. It's also called the purse seine, because it closes like a purse. And this was nylon, which was much lighter. So in '57, a gentleman by the name of Larry Zawanich from San Pedro was the first one to kind of try out this with the help of Starkist. And it was very successful. So our San Diegan Portuguese-based Lou Brito was the first captain to actually make the conversion into purse seining for San Diego. He worked for Larry Zwanich for a trip so he could learn the ropes, and this little article basically says that we tripled our take with a nylon tuna nets. So now we have these big ships. These vessels are 200 to 300 feet long. They're state-of-the-art refrigeration, radar, sonar. Capacity holds from 800 to 3,000 tons of fish, and they're able to fish worldwide, and the cost of these vessels anywhere from $3 million to $12 million each. So this is catching tuna the new way. This here is tuna, and it looks like porpoise swimming with them. They use the helicopter to spot the fish. They encircle the fish. And these little boats here, they're called speedboats, and they're used much like the cowboy uses the horse to corral the horses. This is what they do to corral the tuna. So with the demand for tuna created a demand for more boats, which created a demand for more canneries, which created a demand for more workers. And so we have Campbell's Industries in the 1960s. They were one of the shipyards, and then, like I said, J.M. Martinex in Tacoma, Washington in 1924, and some others in Louisiana and Wisconsin. I wanted to highlight a Portuguese gentleman who immigrated from Pico in 1959. He barely had any education. He was in elementary school. And he became the designer of the tuna purseiner that is used worldwide. Very proud. This is Joe, and this is Cristiano de Rosa, who is a boat owner. He's passed away, but his family lives here. And so Joe designed his vessel called Evelyn de Rosa, built in 1977 with a capacity of 1375 tons, gross tons. This is Joe. Joe always built a model before he actually did the designs for the big vessel. And one of his models is actually at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. You know, to test the vessel, these boats, Campbell Industry would hire the government facility called Lockheed, and they would actually pay them somewhere around $50,000 per test. And Joe's motto was, if it works in the tank, it'll work in the ocean. So they always did that. You know, I had always learned that Joe was a master and very influential in designing these vessels, but I ran into this article from Campbell Crier, which is kind of the Campbell Industries newsletter. And here at the very end, it basically says the vessel, the Mermaid, which is up here, was the forerunner to the Ocean Queen, which was another vessel, a 1,200-ton vessel designed completely by Joe. And so with his designs, then they were taken to other shipbuilding areas, and you know, they are what they are today. Now, because, like I said, more ships, more fish, more canneries. San Diego had its own cannery row. In San Diego, between 1911 and 1980, we actually had somewhere around 9 different canneries. In the old days, the Portuguese in the 1900s, they actually, in order to preserve the catch, they would actually have to salt the fish, and that would allow them to store it and preserve the tuna. And this was a good way to start transporting it to other communities as well. Then Mr. José Azevedo founded San Diego Packing Company in 1914, which was kind of like packing the tuna. And then we have the High Seas Tuna Packing Company, which I don't know if some of you know, but the Rondelay building right by the Portuguese Hall used to be where the cannery was. So here I have a picture of Dolores Madruga. She's right here, and her mother is right here. Dolores started working, and Dolores is Teresa's Madruga's mother. She's the president of PhD. But Dolores started working at the cannery when she's 15 years old, and I talked to her several times about her experiences, but one of the things she told me is they wouldn't necessarily go to work at the cannery. Basically what would happen is, you know, everybody lived in the area. The vessels would come up and tie up right by where the restaurant, the catch is these days. So the vessels would come up, the vessel would sound the horn, they knew the boats were in, the workers would go to the cannery and start packing the fish. So By 1947, San Diego was canning 95% of tuna, and its distribution was worldwide, and it still is to this day. So there were many other businesses that stemmed from the fishing industry and the Portuguese in San Diego. And we have Clipper Oil. There's a shovel thing back there. Rings Around the World. It's a company that manufactures the rings that they use. Cozumar were the nets. Peninsula Bank was a great peninsula founded by my cousin John Rubillo, who is here, I believe. And Balboa Travel, and we have Joe LaRosa here. So there were a lot of industries stemming from that. Also have the American Tuna Boat Association, which was here down by where the Midway is. And this picture is Augie Philando. We have Emma Medina and many others in there. So from this, we have a list of pioneers that I kind of put together. I can't go over, I've talked about some of them, but just to kind of show you who these early Portuguese people were. We have Emo Medina. He really is considered the patriarch of the San Diego Portuguese community. He was very influential in building the church and mainly the hall. Whoops. Sorry. That was Mo. Sorry about that. And he was also considered to be the father of the San Diego fishing industry. I showed you the Oceana, which was the first diesel boat, and then the Normandy that went into. And he really was the first to use radar, sonar, and refrigeration. So for that, he's considered the father of the San Diego industry. Now, he was not only that, he also was a land developer, and I don't know if you can see this, but what I have circled here is called Medina Terrace. And Medina Terrace is right up by Hill Street, right above Catalina, and some Portuguese still live there today. The next person that I'd like to highlight is Lawrence Oliver. Lawrence Oliver was pretty much a genius, I think. He stowed away from Pico Azores when he was 15 years old. And he arrived in San Diego in 1906. He was a boat owner as well with the Rosa brothers, and owned part of Bella Portugal, the Picaruto, and the Lusitana. He developed what was called an ice crushing business, and I can't go into that because it'd be too long, but basically, that allowed for the boats to stay out farther and preserve their catch. And then from that, when refrigeration came into play, and that wasn't needed as much anymore, he developed or started a fish meal manufacturing business. And basically what he would do, he would go to the boats and would gather all the parts of fish that weren't being used, that wanted to be thrown away, and he created a fish meal factory. So it was, he would get the crushed fish for free, and then he was able to sell. He employed a lot of people, and he was also a philanthropist. In 1940s, he actually donated 22 acres of land, which is still in existence today. It's called Camp Oliver, but he donated to the Sisters of Social Service. And like I said, it's still used today. It's up in Descanso. The other people I'd like to highlight are the Rosa brothers, and I know we have many. We have the family of Joe is one of the sons, and Lynette and Annette and Bernadette, and the Rosa brothers basically owned all these vessels, the Bella Portugal, Azoriana, Lusitana, Portuguesa, Picaruta, and Favorite. And most of these were YP's vessels. The next one is Ed Gann. Ed Gann came into the pursing business, and at one time he owned about 15 tuna purse seiners. I want to give a shout out, of course, to my brother, and he's the one in the middle. And he actually, this is a certificate of invention. They used a scoop to brail, it's called a brailer, to scoop the fish from the net into the boat. And it was quite dangerous. And so he developed or invented what's called the mechanical brailer, which is used now. So the legends of the tuna industry, it's truly a family affair because you were a boat owner and the captain of the boat, and your son became a boat owner and a captain of the boat. We have Cristiano de Rosa and Larry de Rosa. And it basically, we have Manuel Silva with his father and then with his son and his brother, and they own several boats. I can't really go into too much of this because we'd be here all day. But Roland Verissimo, and his sons, Roland, Robert, Greg, and Phil, and Billy, and they all were captains of their tuna boats, or hired as captains as well. Frank Correa and his sons and his son-in-law, and they were, again, and then his brothers here earlier in the big boats, and they became tuna boats. Again, my brother, he was captain for over 30 years, and now his son is the captain of one of the boats that he used to run. Now, I have this Point Loma High School 1973 photograph just to show you. This was our soccer team. There are 6 Portuguese boys on this here, and all of them but one became tremendous fishermen, all of them captains of tuna purse-seiners. Only Idalmiro here in the back, he went to college and is now our Portuguese consul here in San Diego. So, but I just think it's admirable that these kids, and most of them went fishing the day after they graduated. So the old and the new, this is they're mending nets. This is my nephew, and you learn from the old. Now, unfortunately, there is a demise of the tuna industry, and the first thing that happened is the war over territorial waters. So the more profitable fishing became, the more other countries wanted to control their waters. And so things went from 3 miles to 12 miles to 200 miles. And within the 200 miles, if you were caught within those waters, sometimes whether or not you were fishing, you didn't even have to go to be fishing. These foreign vessels, and I believe these 2 are from Ecuador, these military vessels would come and they would seize the boats. They would confiscate the catch and the fish, the net, the skiff, all the very expensive stuff. They would imprison the crew, and then we would have to pay fines too. So that went on for quite some time. Then there's the next thing that happened is called what I call the dolphin phenomenon, or I should say the porpoise phenomenon. As most of you, as you may know, the tuna in the Eastern Pacific, so on this side of the Pacific, they swim with dolphins. Actually, we don't know if they swim with the dolphins or the dolphins swim with them, but that's a phenomenon that does exist. So when the fishermen started using these big nets and catching all this fish, they realized that along with the tuna, porpoises were being caught. And the last thing that they wanted was to kill the porpoise, because the porpoise led them to the fish. They were swimming above it, and so they could see where the fish was. So even before the government got involved or anybody else got involved, this is Harold Medina, again Portuguese. He just passed away last year. And Harold Medina was a captain in one of the vessels, and trying to figure out how to help this, how to fix it, he designed what's called the Medina panel. And the Medina panel is a panel of net. You see it right here at the very end of the net. And what that does is allow for the porpoise to swim over the net, and the tuna who are under would stay. Not all the tuna got out, but not all the porpoise got out, but most of the porpoise got out. And so in order to try to remediate that, what they started doing is, after they would allow the porpoise to go out. Then they would send their men to jump into the net and with a mask to see if there were any porpoises entangled. And here you have a guy in a dinghy actually helping out a porpoise and trying to help them. The problem with this, as we know in our community, is that when the guy jumped in the net, sometimes they didn't see a shark blowing about, and we lost lives to sharks, or they were dismembered. So that's kind of what happened. So as that was happening, as you will know, the Flipper TV show was very popular. And so, you know, the industry couldn't compete with the Flipper and the pleas of children, and they would call us, you know, dolphin killers and everything else. So without really knowing what was going on, but they did a great job of just really doing an act on us. But anyway, so what happened was that then the government got involved, and they demanded, or it was law, they had to take a government observer on each trip. So this person was an extra person that had to go, and as the catch was being made, he would count how many porpoise were in, how many were killed, and so every little thing. So everybody was kind of walking on ice. You know, I often say it's akin to, you know, you getting a ticket for drunk driving and then somebody saying, okay, you got to take a police officer to your home, and as soon as you pick up a glass, oh, you're drunk. You know, it was kind of the same thing. So that kind of hurt the industry. So what happened at that point is that most of the vessels were sold to the Western Pacific, where dolphins do not swim with porpoise. The big problem is that the tuna that swims with porpoise is the big tuna, very mature tuna. The fish that swim without the dolphin are the smaller tuna. So that's why now when you buy a can of tuna, you get it very flaky. You're not getting very good tuna. So, and the other thing that was an issue is now. So with the fishing in the Western Pacific and Samoa, the Pacific Islanders or the Pacific Islands near where they fish want a piece of the pie, and so they're imposing what's called tariffs, and they're basically charging $10 a day whether or not you fish. So it's making it a little harder for any tuna fishing for the U.S. industry. You know, whether, San Diego is no longer home base, so it didn't make a lot of sense to keep fishing. There are not very many tuna-based fishing vessels anymore, even there. But there was also another thing. There was an education opportunity. Many of our Portuguese captains and crew members made a very good living. And so they were able to they fulfilled their goal in giving their children better opportunities. So now in our community, we have a lot of doctors and lawyers, teachers, principals, engineers, but it's not the life of fishing. So the lives we lived. The very first, when you immigrate, the very first paycheck usually goes back home, and that's because you probably had to borrow money in order to travel. So that was the priority. The second paycheck goes back home so you can support your family that was left behind. The next priority is you become a U.S. citizen so you can call for your family to come. And then you want to buy a house and you want to go home. So those were kind of the priorities. Now, on arrival, and in the early days, as you know, many people were illiterate. So when the immigration officials were asking for their names, some of them couldn't spell, so the immigration officer would write as it sounded. Like the very bottom, his name is Joaquin, which is a Portuguese name. The immigration officer wrote it down as John King. So, and the guy asked the person that was next to him, what name did he give? He goes, no, don't worry, he called you João Rui or John King. He goes, okay, I'll keep that one. So, and then of course, there were people that wanted to fit in, like Oliver, Oliveira to Oliver and Pereira to Perry. And then for prestige, Rodrigues to Rogers and Broom to Brown. And it was mainly to fit in. So those are kind of some of the names. Now, when we first got here, we came from a very, very small village, as I showed you before. And so most of the immigrants relied on other people. Here I have Dorothy Ventura picture, and I also remember Dolores Francisco as well as Dolores Madruga. And these were people that were already here, and so they basically would help out the newcomers, teach them how to go to the market, how to shop, how to pay bills, how to, and Mrs. Ventura was actually influential in the citizenship classes because he wanted to be a U.S. citizen. So, and the language, most people try to go to night school because they worked in the daytime. So, but that was very, very important. So, because of our coming here, I call it Port English because when I first arrived, I couldn't speak English, but I could speak Portuguese, and people were using words like frigideira and estoa and data, and I'm going, what is that? And so these were words that our community to this day uses, and it's just changed, they changed it from the American word to the English word, to the Portuguese, whatever, Portuguese word. Now the funny thing about this, and Jeannie Smith can attest to this, so Jeannie went to Portugal, and she was very excited to meet her family, and she was sure that she knew Portuguese. So she started using some of these words, and people had no idea what she was talking about. So, and it's, like I said, it still happens today. So, a typical Portuguese home in San Diego, here we have Mrs. Nunes, the lady I just talked about. This was very typical. It was always to have a religious tile in the front, and then you would also have the double living quarters. And you can see this is it almost mirrored, the top and the bottom mirrored each other. Sleeping quarters, kitchen, living room, and whatnot. And so when one of my conversations, I always wondered what that was because, they were both livable. And I asked Mrs. Nunes why they did that. And she said, well, when our family came from the old country, they would have a place to stay until they were able to get on their feet. So, and from that, what happened is then people started to build their own they would have their own little houses and build apartment buildings right behind them for the same purpose. So as families were coming, they would have a place to stay and to live. So now every Portuguese house has the gardens, and this is a Portuguese fruit. Well, it's fruit that is from many places, but very, very. And this is called a cherimoya tree, and we have fig trees and guava trees. So the garden always has lots of trees. We also have, this is the bay leaf tree because we use the bay leaf quite a bit. The colored greens, which we use to cook, and of course nésperas or kumquat trees. Every house would have their own grapevines, and most of them made their own wine back in the 50s and 60s. So the maracujá, as you saw, a lot of our food, this is the passion fruit, and we have our sodas, our desserts, we use a lot of this passion fruit. And of course, with every Portuguese house, you always have the flowers, and these are all flowers that are typical in a Portuguese home. Now, the Portuguese woman, I just call her a pillar of strength because you have to realize some of their husbands would be gone, months out of the year. And I'm not just talking 2 months, sometimes 9 months, whatever. And you never knew when they would come back. And so they would have to be mother, father, caregiver. They made all decisions. They bought whatever they needed to buy, their house or whatever. They really relied on each other. The family was very, very important because you had to learn these things from your family. And the other thing that was also created were bonds with the crews. So if your husband worked on a specific boat, you would bond with the wives of that crew. Number one, because the wife of the captain would be able to give you information on that. Number two, it was your base. The fisherman is a life of sacrifice. You were again out fishing for months. You never knew when you were coming home. It's kind of interesting because most of us have done this. So a lot of these fishermen would be at sea during Christmas time. So Christmas decorations stayed up till they came home. So you celebrated Christmas in March, April, May, or whatever. So, but their goal was very simple: was to make sure that their families never went without, and then to offer their children the opportunities they never had. So, how we celebrate our culture? We are a people of faith. Most Portuguese are Catholic. Obviously there are other religions, but so our base, our faith community is St. Agnes Church. And in 1933, fishermen from 15 vessels pledged 25 cents per ton to build the church. And they were guided by Our Lady of Voyage, and Donna does a great job on this. The heart of our community is the Portuguese Hall, and this is where all the functions happen, the festa, fundraisers for the festa and for other things. So this is kind of the capella, which is now a historic site, is part of the hall. Excuse me. Now, our festa, I know that if you live in San Diego, you've heard a lot about our festa, and our festa actually has an origin to an actual queen. She was Queen St. Isabel of Portugal. Well, Queen Isabel of Portugal. She married very young. She was in her teens, and her parents were from Spain, actually. She married, and she had an immense devotion to the Holy Spirit, and there's several miracles attributed to her. But the origins of the festa are based on the fact that during her reign, Portugal was going through an incredible famine, and she basically gave everything she had to feed the people, and until one day, the only thing that she had of value was her crown. And so she prayed to God that if he could just provide for her people, she would donate her crown to the church. Lo and behold, she comes out of the church, and ships with food are in the harbor. And so that is why we have the queens in our festa. And our festa is the oldest ethnic religious celebration in San Diego. In 2015, we celebrated 105 years of tradition. So that already makes us into 110 years. So we parade along the streets. We have our queens, and you can see her, she's holding the crown. That's symbolic of the festa. And each one of these has a symbol, so the platter is actually the people, the crown is her. We have the kings, and we have other groups. We have the fishing group, and the club groups, and everything else. And of course, we celebrate our Portuguese football team winning the European Cup. Now, one of the things that happens with the Portuguese festa is here we have Father Don crowning, it's called crowning or blessing the cooks of our, in our kitchen. This is Mrs. Madruga and Gabriel. And I don't know if you've heard of the sopas. This is where they make the sopas. And they actually feed probably over 3,000 people during the weekend. One of the traditions that they still keep is in the early hours of Festa Day, of Sunday, they actually have people taking sopas to the less fortunate in the community and the elderly. So you see that. Now I wanted to bring this up because I'm very proud of this. So all these beautiful dresses that you guys see in the parades, they're actually made by our Portuguese seamstresses. And we have 4 of them pictured here. And here's my sister. She's one of them. And I just think these people are incredible. They have no patterns, no nothing, so they basically are given material and they bring up their designs and make some incredible stuff. So, and then, you know, we have, it's something that we're losing, you know, not too many people want to do that anymore. So we keep our traditions here, we preserve them through these clubs. And I won't go into one, but all of them have their own different thing. Their goal is preserving our Portuguese culture and heritage through social events and scholarships. So here we have the Festa de Santa Maru. I think some of you have heard of the famous malasadas. That's them making the malasadas. And the linguiça, you taste it tonight. We have Aliança. And Santa Maru is mainly a Madeira organization. Aliança Suriana is mainly an Azorian organization. And they have here a picture of their famous bifanas and pão doce, or sweet bread, and baking sardine. Now, we preserve our history through the Portuguese Historical Center, which is a little museum. It's a little library and it's a community center, so you're more than welcome to come and visit us. We also have what's called the Portuguese American Dancers, and you know, we're trying to get them here to do a little dance for you, but most of them work. So it was started by Mrs. Muniz. It is now headed by Therese Garces, and they do an incredible job. Now, we celebrate our culture and traditions through our music. We have what these guys used to be called the Point Loma Strings, with a very traditional Portuguese music. We celebrate them through our Portuguese choir. We have the Philharmonica, and we have this thing called Romarias. I don't know if you know, but this was one of those traditions that my aunt and the lady that came in the 1920s actually brought to San Diego. It was celebrated in Peru, and it's done to this day. These are songs that are sang on Christmas Eve at St. Agnes, and then again at the hall the day after Christmas. And this vessel, or the contents thereof, are auctioned off, and this is the biggest fundraiser for the church. All the money raised here goes directly to St. Agnes. So it's a great tradition. They're still doing it, and if you want to see it, come to church on December 24th. That we have our Young Portuguese Club, and then the clubs the schools that we have. You know, of course, Carrillo Elementary right across the street. That's where most of our young immigrants went to. And then, of course, Dana and Correa Middle School is actually named after a Portuguese artist, Stephen Correa. And then you have Point Loma and all the Catholic schools, so I won't go into them. We have the Portuguese market and Prego as our markets, where we can buy all of Portuguese products. Now, the monuments that celebrate, there are a few. I'm almost done. The Tuna Monument is the Tuna Memorial Monument is down at Shelter Island, and this is in honor of the fishermen that have died fishing. So their names and the year that they passed is listed here. here. And then we have founders and pioneers which help to get this monument together. We have the Tuna Fishing Industry Monument, which is in front of the Portuguese Historical Center, and it honors all tuna fishermen living. And now, this is the Waipi Monument, and the Waipi Monument is actually downtown, and you probably passed by it and never knew it. It's right by the entrance to the Fish Market restaurant, where the old Tuna Boat Association used to be, or actual, kind of next to the Midway. So that's where they are. And this is kind of a neat, it tells you the history, and it shows you where they went, and it also lists all the vessels that were involved. Last but not least, we have the Cannery Monument, and this is downtown at the end of 10th Avenue, where most of the, a lot of the boats used to come in, also where the canneries used to be. And it's in Park del Sol, and this is also a real cool monument. So I'm gonna stop here, and I hope you enjoyed. And what I would like to do now is ask our workers, our PHC workers, to please come forward. And so if you have any questions or any comments, you can ask them. So, you can ask me too. I talk too much. Get all the information you needed. Any questions? If no questions, then please go eat. We have lots of food. Enjoy.